This is Freshly Squeezed True Crime, a Florida-only true crime podcast. I'm Suhaili, and before we get to this week's juicy episode, I ask you to visit the website at fstcpodcast.com, where you'll find all of our social media platforms as well as the newest episodes. And also, find us on YouTube, where we'd like you to follow us, subscribe, share it, do all the things. So, pour yourself a tall glass of orange juice and let me tell you a story. If you're a true crime fan, you know that there's no shortage of books, documentaries, podcasts, and original reporting dedicated to the victims of violent crimes and the people who committed those crimes. At the same time, we know that cases that get the most attention are usually ones that are committed against white, middle-class, cisgender people. From serial killers like Ted Bundy, the Golden State Killer, and Paul Bernardo, to the victims of the most talked about unsolved cases like JonBenet Ramsey, the media is busy covering a certain, very small selection of cases. Meanwhile, hate crimes, including murders of gay, trans, and non-binary people, are on the rise. So let's take a look at some of the most infamous gay serial killers and how their victims were treated by the police, the media, and the public. Due to deeply ingrained biases, ignored and mishandled evidence, and assumptions about the victims, some of these cases took decades, while victim counts continued to grow. Here are 4 gay serial killers that evaded detection in part because of homophobia. In 1978, 36-year-old John Wayne Gacy was arrested for the murder of 16-year-old Robert Pice. He told police he had more bodies buried in the crawl space under his house in a suburb of Chicago, which led investigators to find the remains of 33 young men and boys that had been missing for anywhere from a few months to a few years. Peacock's docuseries John Wayne Gacy, Devil in Disguise, dives into how Chicago police and the media turned to victim blaming to explain how Gacy had managed to get away with murder for so long. Jeffrey Dahmer committed the murder and dismemberment of 17 boys and men between 1978 and 1991. Some of his victims were male prostitutes, and he met some of them at gay bars around Milwaukee. By 1991, he had already killed 10 people, but he was nowhere near close to being caught. Milwaukee's gay community was used to people coming and going, and no one, police or civilian, had connected any of the disappearances or considered that there might be a serial killer among them. Attempting to explain away homophobia in the way police investigate crimes, with arguments about it being, quote, a different time, can only get you so far. In the case of Toronto's Bruce McArthur, police were ignoring red flags and conduct biased investigations only a few years ago. McArthur murdered 8 men between 2010 and 2017, and a recently released report found that, quote, misconceptions about the gay community may have impeded the search for his victims. McArthur was known to police for years before he became a real suspect. He was charged with assault in 2001 and was directly connected to at least a couple of the missing men who later turned out to be his victims. Many people in Toronto's LGBTQ+ community believed there was a serial killer hunting in the gay village, but police publicly denied it. In response to criticism of how they handled the case, the police chief said, quote, we knew people were missing and that we didn't have the right answers, but nobody was coming to us with anything. The victim blaming and lack of accountability is just one reason why there is still deep tension and distrust of the police in the gay village. Dennis Nielsen was a serial killer who murdered at least 15 young men and boys in London, England between 1978 and 1983. He targeted groups that police had a history of ignoring and brushing off. Some of Nielsen's victims were gay, and many of them were runaways who were homeless and involved in sex work. Nielsen lured many of them to his place with the promise of a place to sleep for the night, but once they were there, he would strangle or drown them. At least 2 men were assaulted by Nielsen, managed to escape and call the police. Nielsen was questioned by police, but they were convinced the assaults were just part of consensual relationships between 2 men and chose not to dig any further. The homophobia in England at the time was ingrained into the police force, and Nielsen chose victims he knew he could get away with. Paul Nobbs, a victim that managed to escape murder, testified at Nielsen's trial that he chose not to report his assault because he was afraid of being outed. Memories of the Murder, the Nielsen tapes, can be watched on Netflix. It depicts Nielsen's arrest, interrogation, and trial, including how police biases and homophobia assisted Nielsen in getting away with murder when he could have been caught much earlier. Finally, the Fox Hollow Farm. The Fox Hollow Farm murders refer to a notorious case involving Herb Baumeister, a suspected serial killer who targeted and murdered young gay men in the Indianapolis area in the 1980s and 1990s. Baumeister lured his victims from gay bars back to his 18-acre estate known as Fox Hollow Farm in Westfield, Indiana. The initial disappearances were not prioritized by police due to the victim's sexual preference and the social climate at the time. In 1996, after Baumeister's wife filed for divorce and allowed authorities to search the property, investigators discovered over 10,000 charred and crushed human bone fragments scattered across the farm. Due to the condition of the remains, identification has been an extremely challenging ongoing process, with many victims remaining unidentified decades later. Before he could be apprehended or questioned by authorities, Herb Baumeister flew to Canada and died by suicide in an Ontario park in July 1996. He left a suicide note that mentioned his failing business and divorce, but made no mention of the murders. In recent years, the Hamilton County Coroner's Office has renewed the investigation using new DNA technology, leading to the identification of several more victims. As of late 2024 and 2025, officials continue to work on identifying all the remains. The case has been the subject of several true crime documentaries and books, including the Hulu series The Fox Hollow Murders: Playground of a Serial Killer. But now, let's take a trip back to Florida. Nicknamed the I-95 Killer, Gary Bowles confessed to murdering 6 men on the East Coast between March and November 1994. If your math is mathing, that's a total of 8 months. He encountered most of his victims in gay bars, offering them sex in return for money and a place to stay. He charmed his way into men's lives and homes with promises of sex and manual labor, only to end their lives typically by strangling them or bludgeoning them and stealing their credit cards. Police found Bowles' fingerprints and probation record at the scene of the first victim's death in Daytona Beach. Security camera footage also caught Bowles trying to use the man's ATM card. Bowles appeared on America's Most Wanted multiple times and made the FBI's Most Wanted list just 3 days before he was brought in for questioning in connection with the murder of his last victim, Walter Hinton. Quote, each of these murders were brutal. Bernie de la Ronda, the Jacksonville prosecutor who tried Bowles, told the Daytona Beach News Journal, it was not an instant death, like somebody getting shot and dying from that gunshot. It was a real life and death struggle. Hinton's head was bashed in with a 40-pound concrete block, and the victim was found with a sex toy jammed down his throat. Gary Ray Bowles, born on January 25, 1962, in Clifton Forge, Virginia, was raised in Rupert, West Virginia. He was the second son born to his father, William Frank Bowles, who worked as a coal miner and died from black lung disease 6 months before his birth, and his mother, Frances Carol Price Bowles, who remarried several times during Gary's youth. Court records state Bowles' first stepfather was abusive, and his second stepfather was a violent alcoholic, who also abused Bowles' mother and older brother. Bowles' first stepfather, Bill Fields, in time became, quote, really abusive towards Bowles and his brother Frank. He was a very strict disciplinarian, beating the boys with belts, fists, or, quote, whatever he took a notion to hit them with. Bowles, who was 6 or 8 when the beating started, had bruises on his face and welts on his legs. Fields would throw him against a wall and would only stop when he got tired. Fields seemed to enjoy it. When his mother tried to stop her husband, he turned on her. She eventually divorced him and married Chet Hodges in 1978. If possible, he was more abusive than her previous husband. He didn't care where he threw you or where he hit you. He put Bowles' mother in the hospital 3 times. Chet was also an alcoholic and would drink sun up until he went to bed. Bowles' mother also drank heavily. Bowles tried to escape the beating his stepfather enjoyed inflicting. When he was a small child, he hid in the garage or went to a friend's house. His mother and brother testified that Bowles began drinking, smoking marijuana, and huffing glue and paint when he was 11 years old. Eventually, Bowles dropped out of school during the 8th grade. When he was 13, Bowles and his brother ganged up on their stepfather and severely beat him, smashing a rock in his head and nearly killing him, according to court records. He left home soon thereafter, angered by his mother's decision to remain in the marriage. He was homeless for the next few years, earning money as a sex worker for men. He told detectives he started doing that after a motorist picked him up hitchhiking when he was a teen and paid him for sex. Afterwards, the motorist told Bowles he could earn easy money as a male prostitute. The article's choice of words, not my own. Bowles drifted around the country while a teen. He lived in Illinois, Louisiana, Missouri, and Florida. His first arrest, a marijuana charge, came at 17. Investigators say Bowles survived by letting gay men perform oral sex on him for money, though he maintained he was straight, as he prohibited actual intercourse during his sexual encounters. The 5'9", 150-pound Gary was interested in women, and he was known to have been involved in several relationships as an adult. He temporarily lived with some of his girlfriends, yet, for the most part, the relationships were unsuccessful, and at times violent in nature. He also had a history of violence against women. One of Gary's relationships was particularly violent. During his early 20s, he lived for a short period of time with a woman named Wesley in Hillsborough County. In 1982, he was arrested for beating and sexually assaulting her. She received fingerprint-like bruising around her neck as a result of the attack, suggesting that Bowles attempted to choke her. One of her breasts was also bitten and her face was severely battered to the point that her eyes were swollen shut. The victim had severe injuries, including tearing on her vagina and anus. Moreover, an FBI agent stated that during her investigation of the crime scene, she noticed that the bedroom and bathroom of Wesley's residence contained a significant quantity of blood. According to her statement in the court report, the blood splatters on the walls reached as high as 5 feet above the bed. The crime was demonstrative of Gary's violent and sadistic nature. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison on September 27, 1982, for aggravated battery. However, he was released on December 28, 1983, after only serving a year and 3 months. On November 9, 1987, he was sentenced to 8 years in prison for sexual battery case, but was released on April 30, 1990, after only serving 2 years and 5 months. Gary dropped out of grade school, but would later complete his GED in March 1983, while incarcerated in the Florida State Prison. After his release from prison, another conviction was added to Gary's criminal record. Gary was convicted in the summer of 1991 for unarmed robbery in Volusia County, Florida. He pushed a woman down and stole her purse before fleeing. Eventually, he was apprehended, arrested, and sentenced to prison for robbery 4 years, grand theft motor vehicle 5 years, and grand theft for 5 years on July 18, 1991, to run consecutively for a total of 14 years. He was released January 1, 1994, for a total of 12 years and 6 months. Here we fucking go. These are the victims: Gary Bowles. March 15, 1994, John Hardy Roberts, 59, Daytona Beach. April 14, 1994, David Allen Jarman, 39, Wheaton, Maryland. May 4, 1994, Milton Joseph Bradley, 72, Savannah, Georgia. May 13, 1994, Alverson Carter Jr., 47, Atlanta, Georgia. May 18, 1994, Albert Morris, 38, Hilliard, Florida. And November 16, 1994, Walter J. Hinton, 47, Jacksonville Beach, Florida. The killing started March 14, 1994, when Bowles, now 32, struck John Hardy Roberts, 59, in the back of the head with the base of a lamp inside of his home on Vermont Avenue in Daytona Beach. Roberts was hurt, but not fully incapacitated. He fought back, nearly tearing off a fingertip during the struggle, according to Daytona Beach police. Bowles choked Roberts, whose head and face were covered in blood from the blows from the lamp. Bowles eventually crammed a towel down Roberts' throat to suffocate him. The next day, March 15th of 1994, 59-year-old insurance salesman Roberts, who was openly gay, had been found murdered. A friend had called for a wellness check after they hadn't heard from him. When police arrived at the house, it was ransacked, and they saw a gruesome scene that included a stream of blood that had flowed from the living room into one of the bedrooms. Roberts had been strangled and beaten. Bowles told police that following his 1991 release from prison, he had moved to Daytona Beach and moved in with a girlfriend and resumed working as a prostitute. According to Bowles, his girlfriend became pregnant, but then had an abortion after she learned that Bowles was a sex worker. Bowles told police officers he blamed gay men for the abortion. and this led him to become a murderer. The correlation still confuses me. When he murdered Roberts could sense Bowles was still forlorn about his ex-girlfriend and gave him an ultimatum: get over her or get out of this house. That's when Bowles murdered Roberts, police said. Bowles had been staying with Roberts, who had paid him for sex, police said. After he killed him, Bowles stole Roberts' car and wallet and headed north to Nashville, Tennessee, where his trail went cold. During the show A Killer Speaks, thank you Discovery ID, Bowles states that Roberts was watching child pornography, which triggered a memory. This memory made him snap, and he killed Roberts. It wasn't hard for Daytona Beach police to figure out who killed Roberts. You see, Bowles left a probation document at the scene, and it was also caught on ATM cameras trying to withdraw money from Roberts' account. What proved more difficult was capturing him, something they were unable to do until 5 other men in the 3 states were found slain. Bowles wandered around the southeast and mid-Atlantic and killed 5 more people. In each case, Bowles prostituted himself to them before murdering them and then stealing their valuables. In the case of Morris and Hinton, the last 2 victims, he also lived with the victims for a short time before killing them. In total, 6 men would meet their demise to this monster in 8 months. Bowles had a signature. He stuffed the victims' throats with objects: towels, rags, toilet paper, dirty leaves, and even a sex toy. On the night of April 14, 1994, 1 month after Roberts, David Allen Jarman's body was found by a maintenance worker after he failed to report to work at Washington Credit Union, where he was a loan processor. Jarman's parents became concerned and notified a manager at his apartment building. Witnesses told police they saw 2 men resembling Jarman and Bowles walking from a gay bar in northwest Washington's DuPont Circle area to a Red Line metro station, police said. An autopsy showed that Jarman died as a result of manual strangulation. Police investigators found no signs of forced entry at Jarman's apartment and believed Jarman invited his killer into his home. Investigators later learned that Jarman's credit card was used at a Baltimore motel early in the morning of the slaying. Jarman's blue Toyota Tercel was found parked on Baltimore Street and had been ticketed on the same day he was killed. On June 24, 1994, homicide detectives obtained an arrest warrant for Bowles after the state police crime lab positively matched samples of Bowles' handwriting to a Baltimore motel registration card signed hours after Jarman was slain. Bowles was registered at the motel under Jarman's name, using the victim's driver's license and credit card, but gave an address in South Arlington, where Bowles lived about 10 years prior. But from there, the trail of Jarman's killer seemed to grow cold. Investigators in Montgomery and Fairfax counties began focusing on Bowles as a potential suspect in the killings of the 3 gay men in their jurisdictions the previous week, after being notified by a possible pattern by the FBI. Quote, "We didn't really have anything until we got the name from the FBI last week," said Sergeant Harry Gringy. "That's what broke it, really. The name was the little piece that we needed." It should be noted that Bowles was not connected to the 2 other victims due to the manner in which they were killed. For a time, it was believed that Bowles was in the Baltimore-Washington region because he had lived in the area for much of his life. On the morning of May 5, 1994, a worker was checking the grounds of a golf club in Savannah, Georgia. She was looking around a maintenance shed when she came across a gruesome scene. She noticed kind of a lump on the ground and realized she was looking at a body. Police arrived and determined there had been a violent struggle at the scene. The victim, an older man, showed visible signs of trauma to the body, and his pant pockets had been turned inside out, indicating a robbery. But one detail stood out. Quote, "I saw in his mouth that leaves and dirt were protruding. The thought that went through my head is they didn't get there by accident. There had to be a reason that they were put there." The victim was identified as Milton Joseph Bradley, a 72-year-old World War II disabled veteran. An autopsy showed Bradley had been strangled to death and brutally beaten, assaulted so badly that bones in his neck broke. Quote, "There was a lot of rage that went into this murder. There was an excessive amount of force used to kill the victim. It was overkill," end quote. He was well known by the locals around town and many people in Savannah's gay community. Investigators learned Bradley had last been seen leaving a bar with a man who had seemingly been flirting with him. That same man, a witness told them, returns to the bar about 30 minutes to an hour later, without Bradley. Days later, and just 2 hours from Savannah in Hilliard, Florida, the same killer appeared to have struck again. On May 18, 1994, a Hilliard couple realized their son hadn't shown up for work at a convenience store that they owned, so they went to check on him at his trailer. When they spotted blood on the door, they broke inside. There, lying on the floor, was their son, seemingly bludgeoned to death, and his mouth was stuffed with a towel. Investigators on the scene surmised that there had been a violent struggle. The victim, a 37-year-old man named Albert Morris, had been shot, beaten, and strangled. His pant pockets had been turned inside out, and again, there was an item shoved down his throat. But a valuable clue was received from the scene, a palm print on the TV entertainment center. After talking to Morris's associates, they learned he frequented gay bars in Jacksonville and had recently brought home a man named Joey Pearson. He had agreed to let Pearson live with him temporarily in exchange for doing odd jobs around the house, but Pearson wasn't holding up his end of the bargain. The two got into a violent fight at a bar about Pearson's refusal to help out at the home. Police searched for the man, and it soon became clear that Joey Pearson was an alias. However, they didn't have a description of the suspect, and after noticing the similarities between the two murders, they began working with Savannah Police Department. They circulated a sketch and soon found a witness who said he knew the man and had spent time with him recently, which included a visit to a convenience store. Investigators were able to recover video of that day and caught their suspect on tape. That video footage was shown to Morris's friends. There is Joey. That's him. That's what he looks like. He killed Al. Both departments then joined up with FBI as it became clear they were dealing with a serial killer, and one who was a drifter with multiple aliases. They determined he was targeting gay men at bars, taking money and using them before the murders. Authorities then sent out a bulletin to other departments to see if there had been other similar murders. Of course, the murder of John Roberts popped up since Roberts was openly gay, had been found murdered in Daytona Beach, the same MO as the other victims, strangled, beaten with something forced down their throat. Also recall that the Daytona Beach had found a crucial piece of evidence at the residence, a probation paper belonging to a man named Gary Ray Bowles, who had a series of assaults and burglaries to his name. His booking photos looked just like the suspect in Bradley and Morris's murder, and investigators were able to compare his fingerprints in the database to the ones found on Bradley and Morris's crime scenes. It was a match. They had their guy, but where could they find him? While on the run, Bowles was put on the FBI's list of the country's 10 most wanted fugitives for his 4th known victims, and he was profiled on TV's America's Most Wanted 5 times. Gary Bowles was identified as the I-95 killer. Bernie LaRonda, Florida Assistant State Attorney, told prosecutors, quote, most of the murders occurred by the interstate. Investigators were soon contacted by other departments with similar cases. On April 14th, David Allen Jarman, 39, had been found dead in Montgomery, Maryland. He had been beaten, strangled, and found with a sex toy in his mouth. His car and credit cards had been stolen. On May 13th, Alverson Carter Jr., 47, was found dead in Atlanta. He had been stabbed to death with a towel shoved down his throat. His body wasn't discovered for several days. However, Bowles appeared to have disappeared. The killing stopped for months, and media attention waned until he eventually struck again. On November 20th, a 47-year-old man named Jane Hinton failed to show up for work at a flower shop in Jacksonville, Florida. His sister went to check on him and found him murdered. A massive cinder block had been dropped on him. He had been strangled. A toilet paper and rag were shoved down his throat. The victim was believed to have been dead for more than 3 days and may have been unconscious at the time his mouth was stuffed with the material. But at this point, police there didn't make the connection to Bowles, as the I-95 killer had been out of the spotlight for some time. Investigators did, however, locate a pay stub belonging to a day laborer named Timothy Whitfield. They made calls indicating to keep an eye out for Whitfield and eventually showed up at the employment office. On Tuesday, November 22, 1994, he was arrested by an employment office by Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and taken in for questioning for the murder of Walter Hinton. He denied the murder at first, but couldn't maintain his innocence for long. Quote, he said, "Do you know who I really am? I'm a wanted man." Bowles eventually confessed to all 6 murders. When asked later why he confessed, he said, quote, "So the killing would stop." As heard in audio obtained by Mark of a Serial Killer, "I didn't want to kill nobody, but I did. I don't know why," he admitted. On September 6, 1996, a Duval County jury convicted Bowles of the murder of 1994 death of Walter Hinton. By a vote of 10-2, the jury recommended a death sentence before Judge Jack M. Shermer. In sentencing Bowles to death, the court found the following aggravators. Number 1, the defendant had a previous conviction of a felony involving the use and threat or violence to the same person. 2, the capital felony was committed by a person on probation, merged with a previous conviction aggravator. 3, the defendant attempted to rob the victim. 4, the capital felony was committed for financial gain, merged with the attempted robbery aggravator. And 5, the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel. On October 10, 1996, a Nassau County jury convicted Bowles of the May 1994 death of Albert Morris. He was sentenced to life. On August 6, 1997, a Volusia County jury convicted Bowles of the March 1994 death of John Hardy Roberts, robbery with a deadly weapon. He was sentenced to life. But in 1998, the Florida Supreme Court overturned Bowles' death sentence after his lawyer successfully argued prosecutors were wrong to introduce his anti-gay prejudice into evidence. He was given a new sentencing hearing, and on May 27, 1999, he again received the death penalty after only 1 hour of deliberation. Fucking 2-time loser. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed his death warrant on June 11, 2019. This is the end. After 20 years on death row, living in a 6x9 cell, and now age 57, Bowles, DC number 086158, was executed on August 22, 2019 at 10:58 p.m. by lethal injection by the Florida State Prison in Starkey after a 5-hour delay, while the Florida Supreme Court and the U.S. Court of Appeals for the 11th Circuit considered a last appeal from his attorney, who contended the murderer was too intellectually disabled to die. His intellectual disability claim presents evidence of an IQ score of 74, within the accepted range of intellectual disability, and neuropsychological testing results showing brain damage consistent with an intellectual disability. Bowles presented statements from witnesses who described him as forgetful, gullible, naive, immature, socially inept, impulsive, and lacking a sense of consequences for his actions. He had impaired language skills, could not keep up in conversations, struggled with memory, and could not perform day-to-day tasks, such as utilizing public transportation, using money, or seeking employment. The Florida courts ultimately denied Bowles' petition as ultimately filed. The Florida Supreme Court ruled that under state law enacted to establish procedures for litigating death penalty intellectual disability claims, Bowles should have filed his claim in 2004. However, Bowles argued that raising his claim at that time, while Florida was applying its 70 IQ score cutoff, would have been futile, and he could not be required to raise a claim that the courts would have rejected out of hand. Rather, he said it became appropriate for him to raise his claim after the Florida Supreme Court ruling in 2016 that Bowles applied retroactively in Florida intellectual disability cases. The Florida Supreme Court rejected those arguments, writing that Bowles' inaction should not be ignored on the basis of perceived futility of his claim. Prison officials said Bowles had woken up early in the day in good spirits. Bowles' final meal consisted of 3 cheeseburgers and a side of french fries. No one visited Bowles the day of his execution, and he declined a visit from a spiritual advisor. Bowles gave no statement, but referred to a 2-page written letter distributed to the media. Quote, "I want to start by saying that I'm so sorry to all the family and friends of Mr. Hinton. I never wanted to kill him, and I'm sorry for all the pain and suffering I have caused. I hope my death erases your pain." Bowles apologized to his mother. "Having to deal with your son being called a monster is terrible. I'm so very sorry. I never wanted this to be your life. You don't wake up one day and decide to become a serial killer." There were 29 people in the viewing room to witness the execution. Among them was Jacksonville area prosecutor Bernie de la Ronda, representing the Hinton family. Quote, in this case, the victim's sister and victim's mother are both deceased, and that's part of the tragedy, that it has taken so long to get where we're at. The first injection, a sedative, was administered at 10:44 p.m. As the injection begins, Bowles began to murmur to himself before losing consciousness. His words were inaudible to those watching from the other side of the plexiglass window. After a series of ensuring injections, including a paralyzing agent and potassium acetate, Bowles was declared dead 14 minutes later. Bowles was the 99th Florida death row inmate executed since the U.S. Supreme Court restored the death penalty in 1976. He was also the first Volusia County killer executed since October 2002, when serial killer Eileen Wuornos died by lethal injection. The last Duval County killer executed was Mark Assey in August 2017. As of this recording, there are 296 inmates still on death row in Florida, 256 men housed at the Florida Stark and Union Correction, and 1 female at Lowell Annex. In the media, this case can be found on Evil the Killer Speaks, The Mark of a Killer, and World's Most Evil Killers. So now for a closing argument on my soapbox. Quote, then what are you if you're not a homosexual? I'm a hustler, end quote. Former Savannah detective John Best remembers hearing details of the crime as he investigated the murder of 72-year-old World War veteran Milton Bradley. Best suspected that Bowles was bisexual and also believed he might have killed women. He said during an interview with detectives, Bowles freely admitted to killing his male victims, almost in a boastful manner. But when asked if there were female victims, he hemmed and hawed. Gary identified himself as a hustler rather than gay or bisexual, despite having sexual relations with men for money and also having a history of relationships and violence with women. In each case, the violence used was far more than needed simply to kill the victims, and let's not forget the abuse he inflicted on females. Did Gary hate himself so much for being bisexual, or did he really believe gay men altered the course of his life? Let's take a trip back in a time to 1994, a different time as it pertained to the LGBTQ community. Don't ask, don't tell. February 28, 1994. The policy prohibited military personnel from discriminating against or harassing closeted homosexuals or bisexual service members or applicants, while barring openly gay, lesbian, or bisexual persons from military service. The policy was introduced as a compromise measure on the promise to allow all citizens to serve in the military regardless of sexual orientation. In July 2004, the American Psychological Association stated that Don't Ask, Don't Tell, quote, discriminates based on sexual orientation, and that empirical evidence fails to show that sexual orientation is germane to any aspect of military effectiveness, including unit cohesion, morale, recruitment, and retention. It said that the U.S. military track record of overcoming past racial and gender discriminations demonstrated its ability to integrate groups previously excluded. The Republican Party platform that year reiterated its support for the policy, quote, we affirm traditional military culture, and we affirm that homosexuality is incompatible with military service, while the Democratic Party maintained its silence. In 1994, then-Senator Jesse Helms was opposed to the homosexual lifestyle and called gay people degenerates, weak, and morally sick wretches. The Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott added fuel to the fire, comparing being gay to a condition like alcohol or sex addiction or kleptomania, a pathology in need of treatment. America is a different country now than it was 29 years ago, but the Stone Age in which gay people were seen as perverts, justifiably targeted for violence or effective, is not too distant a memory. And in too many quarters, it is still extremely difficult for people to be out and gay and trans without experiencing severe social, physical, or economic repercussions. The reason not to support LGBTQ plus people is the lingering sense that there's something strange or not right about it, that it's fine for them to do whatever they want in privacy, but that who they are and how they live is just not the same as others. That being LGBTQ is not as powerful, not as loving, not as legitimate. This is not a political issue. This is a human rights issue. This podcast is a supporter and ally of the LGBTQ plus community. We see you, we hear you, and we stand with you. Because at the end of the day, if we are truly believe that America is the experiment built on individuality, then we stand to gain from everyone coming into its fold. The Don't Ask, Don't Tell Repeal Act of 2010 is a landmark United States federal statute enacted in December 2010 that established a process for ending the Don't Ask, Don't Tell, thus allowing gay, lesbian, and bisexual people to serve openly in the United States Armed Forces. President Barack Obama's Defense Secretary Leon Panetta and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Admiral Mike Mullen provided the certification required by the Act to Congress July 22, 2011. Implementation of the repeal was completed 60 days later, so that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was no longer policy as of September 20, 2011. However, the pendulum has swung as it always does, and here in the Sunshine State, things aren't so warm and fuzzy. Here's a quick rundown of some key areas where the governor's administration has taken action in what is being described as attacks on the LGBTQ plus community. Don't say gay. Gender-affirming care bans. Anti-transgender bathroom bill. License to discriminate in healthcare. Restrictions on pride displays. Removal of LGBTQ anti-bullying resources. Opposition to LGBTQ protections. It's important to note that DeSantis and his supporters often frame these actions as protecting parental rights, promoting traditional values, or ensuring child safety. However, LGBTQ plus advocates and organizations like the Human Rights Campaign and Equality Florida vehemently oppose these policies, describing them as discriminatory and harmful to LGBTQ individuals and communities. Listen, love is love. Hope will never be silent. Be true to yourself is an act of courage, grace, and love, because it takes courage to grow up and become who you really are. This episode was squeezed to perfection. First We Squeeze is hosted and written by me, Sue Haley, and executive produced by Ebony. Still thirsty and need more? Visit us at fstcpodcast.com for links to all our social media handles, including YouTube. Want to keep the juice flowing? Make a donation by buying us a glass. And as always, cheers.